I just want to start by saying some of the language used here and kind of a thesis by Dr. Finegan and Professor Yule is deeply distasteful and very selective, to say the least. And the language, I think, again, I think people should reflect on the language that they're using and some of the critiques. And again, we're conflating issues that, you know, with assisted dying, with other kind of societal issues and kind of deep inequality in society. And again, it is not helpful to this debate. We're trying to have a civilised debate that's very complex. It can be difficult regardless of what your opinion on the situation is. So I would again ask people just to kind of reflect on their statements and so forth. Just in relation to the slippery slope, because this is a bit of a kind of a red herring in relation to those that oppose assisted dying. And I think you put it very well that if assisted dying was legislated in this jurisdiction, then it would lead on to everybody wanting to avail of assisted dying. That is not the truth, right? That is not the truth. And anybody that wants to say different than that, I'd like to hear. Because this kind of, it's the argument that, you know, this is, you know, anybody with an ailment then wants to die. What a ridiculous argument, right? What a ridiculous argument. And I think that's important to kind of, to touch on.
Thanks. Just briefly, I mean, any of the language I used in my statement or submission is language reflected in court judgments and the writings of bioethicists, including pro-euthanasia bioethicists. Various really important issues were raised, and I think a lot of this comes down to the question of how do we draw a line that allows euthanasia only in case of terminal illness. I've challenged the idea that any such line is non-arbitrary and is coherent, and in response, Dr. O'Donovan justified the line by saying that outside of terminal illness, it is possible that life might improve. And it's worth testing that justification against the four basic rationales offered for allowing any euthanasia at all. Those four basic rationales were respect rational choice, autonomy, minimise harm, and the idea that life's value can diminish in value according to the views of the person whose life it is. None of those four rationales fit with the idea that we ought to restrict euthanasia just in case of terminal illness. Each of those rationales individually, and more so collectively, justify...
That's speculative.
It's not. It's a matter of just reasoning it out. You can think through the case of someone says,
that's speculative.
respect my rational choice. I'm not terminally ill, but respect my rational choice. I want euthanasia.
It's speculation. That's
thinking.
Speculating.
It's thinking.
But you're speculating.
I'm not. I'm thinking.
No, you're
speculating. I can think
it
through. We also mentioned was the issue of if you restrict euthanasia to case of terminal illness, you won't have people choosing euthanasia because they're a burden, but the data from Oregon contradicts that. In over 50% of cases in Oregon, people report feeling a burden as one of the reasons for choosing.
You're twisting language there. You're twisting language. It's really unfortunate.
I'm reading the reports that are published and are available online.
Unfortunately, you're using
they're available for yourself, Deputy, if you want to look at them. I'm thinking and reading data, which is different from speculating.
Well,
and that figure of over 50% has risen up from roughly 30% from when the law in Oregon was first introduced. The last point I just mentioned before we move on, was the issue of New Zealand, that New Zealand might be a restrictive model. The case numbers for the first year of the euthanasia operation in New Zealand was 328, whereas in Oregon it was 16. That's an absolutely massive increase from where Oregon was initially, and the population of Oregon now is not too dissimilar to the population of New Zealand, and New Zealand already has more euthanasia numbers than Oregon.